Thanks for watching HCAM. If you want to help create content like this, become an HCAM member. As a member, you'll have access to professional quality equipment and software, as well as guidance from HCAM staff. Come see us at 35 Pond Park Road, Suite 8, conveniently located near Route 3 and Derby Street in Hingham.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming. I appreciate your attendance at this important event. My name is Skip Hull. I'm the current chair of the Hingham Land Conservation Trust. And it's an honor to be up here and to have our panelists here for this great discussion. Before we get started, we need to take care of a bit of board business, which should only take us a few minutes. We have a board of members that serve on a volunteer basis. You can find their names listed on the back of your agenda. But I'm going to read off their names now, and if you could please stand, I would appreciate that. Again, my name is Skip Hull. I'm the current chair. Joe Beerworth, vice chair. Tom Bright, our treasurer. Martha Falvey, our secretary. Don Kidston, Eileen McIntyre, Nick Souls, and Barbara Wolin. And the business we need to take care of is re-electing the board for another term for 2017 and the board and the officers. And so I'm looking for a motion to re-elect our officers and board for 2017.
So moved. Second.
All in favor of the officers and board serving another year, say aye, please.
Aye.
Thank you. If you noticed, there was a name absent from that list. Kathy Reardon is stepping down from the board as a formal member of the board. I think we've Well, we know your phone number and where you live, so we reserve the right to call you in moments of distress. So. Me especially on that. Kathy has been a long-standing member of the board, joining in 1991, serving as chair of the board for many years, and serving alongside at least 27 different board members over that time. The board, the trust, and the town are very fortunate to have a citizen like Kathy, whose commitment to conservation and land management coincides with willingness to serve. As you probably likely know, Kathy and her husband Bill were recognized as Hingham's Citizens of the Year in 2011. In recognition of the many ways that she and Bill have served and continue to serve our community. Kathy is a model for us all in the way she applies her intellect, skills, and enthusiasm as an involved citizen. The Hingham Land Conservation Trust is very happy that Kathy has agreed to work with the board on a couple of ongoing projects over the next year or so. I personally want to thank Kathy for all her years of service and for making me welcome on the board, as I'm sure all the members she's served with welcome. And please join me in congratulating Kathy and thanking her for all her service. With that, we're going to start our program. That concludes the business of the board. So tonight we have a great panel of professionals here to share in our program, Understanding Our Watershed. The panel of experts hopefully will deepen our knowledge of the watershed, how it works, and how our actions, both as individuals and as a community, can impact the sustainability of this critical water source. Let me introduce our panelists. Kristen Uterwick is an environmental policy specialist and a member of the board of the Weir River Watershed Association. John Walsh is the VP of Operations from Aquarian. Duane LeVangie is Chief of the Water Management Program for the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. And Kirk Shilts serves on the Town of Hingham Water Supply Committee, as well as the Board of Health and the Sewer Commission. In the interest of time, we're going to handle questions at the end of the program, and we're asking that if you have a question, we can expedite that by writing them down, and we'll read them all together at the end, and we'll ask the panelists to reply. Because we are limited, the library has a hard close time of 9 o'clock. The program is being recorded for future airing on HCAM. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kristen, who's going to begin the panel discussion with an overview of the watershed. There are some maps and some graphics and data that are in the handouts that you've received. So we may be referring to those. So I'll make note of that. So Kristen, thank you.
Thanks for having us here tonight. Here on behalf of the Weir River Watershed Association, we are a small volunteer organization that works to protect the health of the watershed. And I wanted to start my remarks with a basic overview of what a watershed is, because that will be fundamental to tonight's conversation. And you know, when I ask my parents what a watershed is, I get answers. It's a building where I keep my water. I don't know, you know. So I thought maybe that was a good place to start. And I'm their child; they should know better. But so basically, a watershed is, if you think about it, it's the land that catches the water and it all drains to one spot. Sort of like a bathtub. It's not exactly a perfect analogy, but if you think about it, it's the walls of the shower, the walls of the water curtain, and the bottom are all draining to one spot. And in our case, it's the Weir River. The bathtub is not a good example because some of the precipitation that lands in the watershed doesn't actually drain. It evaporates, or it gets stored. It gets stored in surface water like wetlands, lakes, ponds, reservoirs, or it infiltrates the ground and becomes part of the groundwater system. And I think that's important to understand when we talk about where we're getting our water tonight. Some facts about our watershed. There's a great map that is in your handouts that shows the geography of it. The watershed covers the communities of Hingham, Hull, Cohasset, Weymouth, Norwell, and Rockland. It serves the needs of both humans and wildlife, and I think that's also important to keep in mind tonight as we talk. Some fun facts about our watershed are it's about 15 to 20 square miles of land that contributes to the non-tidal part of the river. So the non-tidal part is everything above the Foundry Pond Dam. There are 7 named freshwater ponds. And Accord Pond is the only pond which is natural, the only large pond which is natural. The sediment that is in our watershed is sediment that was deposited by glaciers. It's largely sand and gravel, which is really great for recharge, which is that precipitation that infiltrates into the ground. And it's fed by a number of tributaries. The watershed is part of an area of critical environmental concern, which really encompasses the estuary at the end of the watershed, but it recognizes the fact that the natural resources that rely on the watershed are very important. We have habitats such as vernal pools, rare species habitats, marshes, and wetlands that support a variety of animals, including more than 100 species of birds. A lot of marine mammals rely on the and shellfish rely on the water at the end of the watershed. What else? We have all sorts of fish. I'm not a fish person, but I can read you a list. It's alewives, smelt, flounder, bluefish, striped bass. There's a big nursery and feeding area for them. And the marshes within the watershed support a variety of animals as well. Let's see. There are a lot of dams in the well, not a lot, but there are a few dams in the watershed which pose a problem for the fish that live in the ocean and spawn in fresh water, and so we've noticed a decline in those fish populations. We're not exactly sure that it's just related to the dams. It could also be a water quality issue or a water quantity issue, but that's something that we're aware of. And let's see. I think that's my fun facts. I told you guys I'd be fast. But basically what I want to stress tonight is that the watershed supports the natural environment as well as the humans, all of us who are sitting here in the watershed. And beyond the watershed boundaries, what we do here affects the larger natural resource environment. So what we do here drains to Boston Harbor, which drains to, Mass Bay and the larger aquatic environment. So as we talk about our water use here and how that impacts natural resources, I just want to keep in mind that what happens here, it's not Las Vegas. What happens here doesn't stay here. It expands. So.
Kristen, I know you're going to talk a little bit about some of the stresses on the watershed a little bit later, but maybe you can touch on those now, kind of give us a little preview of what some of the big items are.
Sure. Well, I know most of our conversation is going to talk about water quantity, right, later on. So maybe I'll talk about things that aren't related to water quantity because I don't want to jump the gun yet on that. Some of the things related to water quality, though, for example, I talked about how when it precipitates, the water drains, and when that happens, it picks up what's on the land. So cigarette butts, plastic bottles, fertilizers, pesticides, all of that is potentially washed into water bodies that travels into the river and into ponds and lakes and can affect the marine life or the aquatic life that lives there. Some of it's consumed, some of it can cause entanglement. So that's a big thing. That's something I work on. I should back up and say the Weir River Watershed Association is something that I joined as a volunteer because I live there and I'm concerned about it, but this is certainly not my profession. And so that's why I have my cheat sheet. And let's see, what else do we have? Oh, so one of the things that we'll talk about that's not related to water withdrawal but is related to the quantity of water in our watershed is how we use our land in terms of impervious surface. So ways that we pave our land, or the houses that we build with big roofs, basketball courts, all of that affects the ability for water to infiltrate into the groundwater system. So as we're withdrawing water, if we're not recharging it, that's a big concern. That's one of the reasons why our water levels are so low. It's not just a matter of withdrawing it, it's also that we're not recharging it. This is, even in its undeveloped state, the watershed is not great in terms of being replenished by recharge. There's some studies that have been done to show that even in its undeveloped state, things like migratory fish habitats are impaired under drought conditions. So even if we didn't live here, it wouldn't be perfect in terms of supporting the migratory fish. Is that how?
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can touch a little bit more on that later, perhaps. Okay. But thanks.
Sure.
Now I want to pass it over to John Walsh, who's going to give us a uniquely qualified brief us on the hydrology of the watershed, how the water flows through the aquifer, where we draw from it, through our the system of wells and ponds, and give us some insight into how all that works.
Okay.
Thanks.
Well, thank you for having me here this evening. Again, I'm John Walsh. I'm the Vice President of Operations for Aquarion. Aquarion is, I think everyone here knows who we are, but we are the water supplier for most of the residents of Hingham and Hull, and about 300 customers in North Cohasset. Beyond that, we own and operate 73 water systems like this throughout New England, serving about 700,000 people. So in my role, I'm responsible for the operation, maintenance, and infrastructure of all of those systems. For this system, our water supply comes from our reservoir, the Accord pond in South Hingham, and about 15 to 20% of our water comes from the reservoir. We also draw water from 11 wells, and about 80 to 85% of our water comes from the wells. And then we get about 3% of our water from Cohasset. Cohasset actually provides every day us the amount of water that equals what Linden Ponds uses the previous day. So it's a unique arrangement. So we purchase a little bit of water from them. So the reservoir and the 11 wells, they're all in the Weir River subbasin. And the wells, just a little bit of background on the aquifer. So the aquifer was formed, a long time ago when there was an ice age here. As the ice receded, this was a bedrock valley, and as the ice receded and it melted, it carried soil, sand and gravel, into the valley and filled it up. I think somewhere between 70 and 100 feet of this material is at least in the middle of the valley where our wells are located. So when it rains, that water accumulates in the pore space between the sand and the gravel. And I bring this up because I've actually had people who've asked me if there's a big cavern under the ground where the water's coming from. And no, it's just the water in between, in the pores between all the sand and gravel. So our wells are drilled into that, our 11 wells are drilled into that sand and gravel. They're between, I think, about 60 and 80 feet deep into that sand and gravel. And as I said, about 80 to 85% of our water comes from there. Now the water is pumped from the wells and from the reservoir. All the water goes to the treatment plant. And it's a unique system in that for many water systems, and we have a lot of them, a lot of treatment plants like this, you're getting your water from one source, usually a reservoir, and usually it's out the back door of the facility. Here we're pumping from a couple miles around. All this water comes to the treatment plant. It's all treated there. So every drop of water that is coming into the system, other than the Cohasset water, goes through the treatment plant. So we are allowed to withdraw 3.51 million gallons a day from the combination of the reservoir and the wells, and that's on an average over the year. So you take the full volume of water that we withdraw over a calendar year, divide it by 365, and we have to be under the 3.51 million gallons a day. And for the last 15 years, we've been close to that limit. So there's a number of things we do to try to control the growth in water demand. One of them is a water balance program. What the goal of that program is, as new development comes in, the goal of it is to try to offset that new water use by reducing, on a gallon per gallon basis, the water use, the existing water use. We also have been tackling what some people refer to as non-revenue water, some people refer to as unaccounted for water. Ultimately, it's water that is lost in the system. Non-revenue, unaccounted for, just two ways to measure it. A component of that is leakage. So over the last couple of years, we've done aggressive leak detection. For one 18-month period, we did 6 system-wide leak detections. We found just over 80 leaks. Some of those are on water mains, some of them are on services, some of them are on hydrants, and we fix all those very quickly, usually within a day or two. And the end result is that our usage, our withdrawal of water from the wells and the reservoir has actually come down in the past year. In 2016, we're at about 90% of that 3.51 million gallon per day limit. The other thing we do is conservation. So anybody who irrigates here or waters their lawn knows that for years we've had irrigation restrictions in place. And what we've been doing is a 2-day-a-week restriction. So you're allowed to water 2 days a week, depending on the number of your address, odd or even. So, and the other thing we do is we've been working closely with the town and with Kirk in particular to make sure that we understand the development that is coming online in the community, because at some point in time, the growth will be significant enough that we'll need to find another source of water supply. And withdrawing more water from the Weir River subbasin, from either our wells or the reservoir, it's not likely that that's going to be the source of supply. It'll have to be, it could be a well that's outside the Weir River subbasin. It could be an interconnection with the neighboring utility, in particular MWRA, or we are looking at an option of getting water from the desal plant that is in Taunton, that's ultimately, it flows to Brockton right now when they actually run that facility. So we're looking at a number of options and making sure that we time it so those new supply is online when it is ultimately needed because of development. So that is it.
It's a rundown. Okay, thank you on that. I should mention we're being joined tonight by Joan Meschino. Thank you for being here. I'm hoping that you can say a few words later if you'd like, and maybe field some questions. Okay, thank you. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Duane. Duane, as I mentioned, represents Mass DEP, and is going to give us some insights into how our water supply is regulated, and how we as homeowners are impacted by that.
All right, thank you. I apologize, I've had a cold all week, so my voice is coming and going here. So I have worked at Mass DEP since 1990 in the water management program. The water management program is the way the state allocates water. If you withdraw over 100,000 gallons per day, you need a state approval. And there's two ways in which you get those approvals. You had the ability to register your water back in 1987, and it said what you used from 1981 to 1985 on average was your registered volume. Aquarion has lived with that volume. That's the 3.51 John has mentioned. So that's the first way we allocate water. Through the registration process, some refer to it as grandfathering. There's not a lot of conditions on a registration. It says you tell us how much you take and from where, and provided you stay under your volumes, you're good to go. And you know, Hingham's done a very good job, Hingham and Hull, complying with that. I mean, think about it. You're using the same water you've used for 30 plus years now. The second way you get water allocated is through a permit. So if you weren't registered, or you've added or increased, you need more than 100,000 over what you're registered for, you need to go through a permit process. And you've managed to avoid that. I know there's development pressures here, so that may be where you go, is to seek a permit. In the permit process, I'm spent 27 years now juggling John's interests and Kristen's interests. We're asked to juggle 11 interests under the Act, everything from water supply needs to fish needs to farming needs to recreational needs. And it's been a very difficult challenge, to say the least. In fact, some people weren't like what we are doing with that. So in 2010, they convened what was called the Sustainable Water Management Initiative, where they said, let's take another look at how we allocate water. And what that does is kind of put each watershed. What we did in that initiative was we looked at 1,400 watersheds in the state. And those watersheds were really small scale. There's a map in one of your handouts. The two sub-basins we're talking about here that make up most of the withdrawals in this watershed are 6 and 8 square miles roughly. And that plays into the permitting, as does the condition of those watersheds. Both the watersheds in question here are highly impacted. They're what we call a Category 5, a biologic category or a groundwater category. So they're as impacted as we have. That plays a role in the permitting. The other part of the permitting that is, I think, particularly relevant to folks in this room is, so if you need more water and you develop a new well or you get surface water, you're going to have to do what we call mitigation for that additional ask. And mitigation of things that help protect the watershed, improve the biology of the watershed. There's various types of mitigation. One could be removing dams. So if a dam has been removed and we're crediting activities that the town has done back to 2005, so taking out a dam is a potential mitigation activity. Purchasing and protecting open space is a potential mitigation activity. Recharging stormwater. As Kristen said, stormwater is a significant quality impact. So recharging stormwater, taking impervious pavement, getting that into the ground is a potential mitigation activity. These are all things we're promoting, giving credits for, and again, crediting back to 2005. Another one, I know some of the system is stored here, fixing II is a potential mitigation activity. So those kind of bring together some of the permitting conditions. Other permit conditions are things that I think most of what you guys have done. So outdoor water use restrictions, some communities never want to implement a water use restriction. You guys are ahead of the curve on that. That would be a required element of your permit. Meeting 65 gallons per person per day would be a required element of a permit, and I believe you've been pretty good on that one. The other standard that John mentioned earlier is what we refer to as unaccounted for water. Our standard is 10%. So if you're not making the 10%, we would put see what pathway you're doing to try to achieve that. Ideally, what we have people do is what we call an industry standard, an M36 audit. Do the audit, recognize where that audit is saying to spend the money to chase those, the either non-revenue or the leaks, find out what the problem is, and then invest your time, effort, and money in trying to get to that standard. So those are things that, should you get a permit, you're going to have to do. Some of the things John mentioned, buying water from perhaps somebody else will require an interbasin transfer. An interbasin transfer approval will require some of those same activities. So again, you're ahead of the curve on a lot of those efforts. So that's makes the permitting far more easier, either interbasin transfer or water management, should that be a need. Another role I play is on the, I sit on the Drought Management Task Force, and we had a very interesting year. It's the most significant drought that we've seen since probably the 1960s. It's been a fairly strong winter and spring starting off. We're still cautiously optimistic that we're going to start the summer at normal. At the moment, we're on pretty much step 2 on a 5-step scale across the state. We have some groundwater locations in the state that are still lagging behind, but we'll meet in early April to reassess what those conditions are. But it was a very difficult year, and a lot of people who have resisted doing restrictions are now talking to us, how do I do it? Can I regulate private wells? That's another issue that I know brings up a lot of feelings. That is a potential mitigation credit too, taking on private well regulation, putting them under the same kind of schedule as a public water supply. I'm usually the bad guy in the room trying to juggle all of these issues, and you know, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thanks, Duane. Yeah, there's a lot of hurdles there to cover to get some changes. But you mentioned, in the context of sewering, you mentioned II. Can you explain what that is?
So II is infiltration and inflow. So the sewer pipes might be leaking. That's cracks underground, water leaking into those. So you're fixing those, we can quantify a volume. So that would be a direct credit. In other words, some people direct their sump pumps into it. So disconnecting sump pumps and getting those out. Leaky manholes or leaky manhole covers those are always water that we want to recharge. The groundwater leaks into your wastewater collection system and then it's shipped off out of basin. So that's another, we have direct credits. That would be a direct credit where we could come up with a math for what you're saving. The stormwater is another direct credit. So if you take 3 acres of pavement and you direct it back into the ground instead of directly into a stream where it may be going now, that recharges, we can credit that. Most of the other credits are kind of qualitative. The land purchase, dam removals, we can't do a gallon per gallon, but we're kind of coming up with a scoring on some of those other type of beneficial improvements.
Okay. Great, thank you. So we've covered a couple of important aspects of the system and how it works. So I wanted to touch upon now some important progress that we've made locally, and in particular, we wanted to mention the good news about the town's purchase of the Laner property. So at the 2016 town meeting in Hingham, voters approved the purchase and conservation of a very special piece of property in town, 50 acres of woods, fields, and streams, which had been owned by the Laner family since the 1920s. Along with 50 adjoining acres already preserved by the HLCT land trust, and that's Jacob's Meadow, along with Hingham Conservation Commission land. This acquisition now creates 100 acres of continuous wildlife and watershed protection. And I do want to emphasize the watershed protection aspect, because these are, if you're familiar with the location of the property, the Laner property and Jacob's Meadow, it's right in the heart of the aquifer that runs through town that supplies our water supply. So this is critical and important for the watershed. So, Kristen, can we go back to a little bit of some of the stresses in the context of kind of what we've heard, and kind of the stresses on the watershed?
Sure.
You want to touch on that a bit more?
Yeah. So one thing that I didn't mention, because I wanted you to hear about our water withdrawal first, is that despite the fact that we're meeting all of the requirements here in town, we still are living in a stressed watershed. As I mentioned before, analysis of the watershed, even if you looked at no development, suggests that during really dry summers, fish are not able to migrate to their spawning grounds because water recharge is so low. In 2001, there was a study done to look at water models and how that compares to the needs of the natural resources, the animals in particular, who rely on the watershed for their survival. And they talked about, I need to look for the term, maximum safe flow, I think is the term they used. And it's basically the idea that you can withdraw water to about 50% of what you would have under normal undeveloped conditions. That's what they're considering safe. If in their analysis, they estimated that you could withdraw about 12 million gallons per day, which we don't come close to, during the winter months, and still maintain that 50% threshold. And when you think about it, if somebody took 50% of our water away, our lives would be changed pretty dramatically, right? We'd be competing with our neighbors for water. Some of us might move. This is exactly what the natural resources are doing. The animals are. I had some neighbor of mine had a lot of mice and chipmunks die in his pool because that's where the water was, and they go in and they couldn't get out. And so, this is having an effect on our environment. Our needs for water are different in the summer and the winter, and that's true as well for the animals that survive within our natural system. And so the analysis looked at, okay, well, you could take about 11 million gallons of water a day during the winter months and still hit that 50% threshold. Their number for the summer months was 0.72 million gallons of water a day. And we just heard that we're taking somewhere between 3 and 4 million gallons of water a day on average. It's higher in the summer. The numbers I have are 4.94 million gallons of water a day. I don't know if that's the most current, but that's 5 times the amount of water that's needed to maintain that pretty low 50% threshold. So one of the things that we're working on in the watershed is trying to identify ways to increase recharge and to reduce use. And I think there's a handout, I think it's called Resources for Protecting Your Watershed, and that talks about some of the opportunities to locally engage to find ways to reduce your impact. So there's some information about the Aquarian water restrictions. You're welcome to restrict yourself even further than what those restrictions are. Aquarian has a great rebate program right now to try and prevent people from using their irrigation systems. That's a big thing for us. We think about the natural resources that rely on the watershed for their health, and we don't consider grass one of them. So a big goal of ours is to reduce people's reliance on water-intense landscaping like grass. And another thing that we're working on, which we've just started, and I'll point out Patricia. Patricia is also here with the Weir River Watershed Association, and if you're interested in helping us to explore the idea of creating a municipal bylaw that would require private well users to abide by the same restrictions that are imposed on public water users. That's something that we're just starting to explore. We're hoping to collaborate with Hull so that it has a greater effect on the watershed. Heard that it's a potential credit for the system. So, those are a couple of things that we're interested in getting going to really address this overdrawn issue within the basin. Some of the other opportunities on this handout include our upcoming Our upcoming cleanup. Every year we collaborate with the Straits Pond Association. So April 29th, there's a cleanup here in the watershed. It's at multiple locations, and I put my email address down. So if anybody's interested in joining us, every year we get a pretty good haul of trash from the watershed. We're hoping to engage the high school a little bit this year. I don't know if any of you are on Hingham Pinboard Facebook page, but there's been a lot of talk about the pollution, especially the bottles and cans that are thrown on the road, and so we hope to tackle some of that, and in general just try and improve the health of the watershed. But really water quantity is our big focus given last year's drought and the fact that as long as we can remember, the river went drier earlier and stayed drier longer than we remember. And we anticipate that, with climate change, our precipitation patterns are going to change such that the rain will fall in faster bursts. And so that increases the chances that a lot of this will just run off unless we'll actually infiltrate the ground. And that's countered by the fact that we'll probably also have fewer rain events. So the rain events that we have will be hard and heavy, and they won't really do what they need to do in terms of recharge, contrasted with the fact that there'll be less rain, especially during the summer months when we need it. So that was a ray of sunshine, huh? That's why we give you the handout. There's stuff you can do.
Thank you, Kristen. You mentioned private wells, and guessing Kirk may know the number of private wells we have in town. So maybe you can kind of fold that in just as an informational piece. But Kirk is in a unique position representing or serving the town in multiple capacities on boards and committees and water, sewer, and health. So if you could share some insights into things that we're doing as a town or may do in the future, and that would be great.
So now we get to the dry part of the program here. Yep. A town meeting established the Water Supply Committee back in 1931 to do a couple of things. To work with the water supplier, even back then, to coordinate the efforts of the water company and the town for water use, and also to look at the possibility of the town purchasing the water company. And over the years, we've had studies to do that. And so I've been on the Water Supply Committee since 2002. And as you know, the Water Supply Committee, it was split. And we now have a separate committee looking at the potential purchase of the water company. And that's not my committee. And so what I'm here to talk about is the committee that I serve on, where we are a liaison to the town for water-related issues. And we meet about 3 or 4 times a year, and we listen. And we give our advice to the water company, but we do not have any authority on the Water Supply Committee to do much of anything. And so, again, we have that split within the group. I'm on the Board of Health, been there since 2004, and the Board of Health, obviously we look at the health of the citizens of the town, and water is an integral component to that. So we have the water company in regularly to inquire about the status of our water supply. But the water that we are most familiar with and regulate, private water supply. That would be your about, I wrote that down, about 342 residents out there. They get their water supply not from Aquarian. They pull it out of the ground and they drink it. And they rely on us to manage the watershed to make sure they are able to get that water, because that's their right. Now this past summer, just for instance, we had about 45 wells that we were really worried about because they're on the shallow side. We had a number of them, homes in which they ran out of water. Their well went dry. And so that is well, for them, catastrophic. And so we are very cognitive of the responsibility we have on the Board of Health for that. In addition, we have about 515 irrigation wells that we permit through the town. And we oversee them too. And our permitting is for the setbacks to make sure we don't have contamination, and also to determine whether it's appropriate for that particular piece of property to do these various things. So the Board of Health looks at those 2 issues, the 3 issues actually. And I'm also on the Sewer Commission. Only been there for about a year now. But the Sewer Commission, as Duane said, we look at the pipes that are in the ground that are actually dewatering this watershed. Because, you know, they have a leak detection, they have a leakage issue, as we know, on the water supply, but we have a leak problem on the sewer supply. We're pulling water out of the watershed because it's leaking into our pipes. That's why for those people who have a sewer system, a third of the town, a fair amount of your money that you spend goes into determining where those leaks are and plugging those to keep water from going into the pipes. He's looking to keep water from going out of the pipe. Okay? And as you know, with the Sewer Commission, the water that does go into our pipes, sewer pipes from your homes, it's transferred out of the watershed, right? The MWRA, it goes into Boston Harbor. If you live down in the Weir River Sewer District down by Hull, it goes to Hull, treated and dumped in the Atlantic. And as you know, we've been talking about South Hingham, the potential of doing some sewering up in that area, and whether we would have something there to bring the water back in to the Weir River Watershed with a regional decentralized plant. That's something that we're actively looking at from the town perspective. So everything is related. And one of the other things that I do, because I'm with the Sewer Commission, the Public Works Director, Randy Sylvester, he's in charge of the stormwater management program. So that's something I've done a lot with him, but now I have a more intimate relationship because I'm on the Sewer Commission. So I don't speak for any one of those organizations here tonight. I'm a member of each. I can talk about them and give you my opinion, but because I'm only one person, I do not speak for the 3 of those. I just want to make sure that you hear at the end. So one of the things that was mentioned was the irrigation well, the 515 irrigation wells. Back in, I think, 2009, the Water Supply Committee came up with a bylaw for the town of Hingham. that we would have all the irrigation systems that are out there come into compliance primarily based on the way they function. We wanted to make sure that every irrigation system had a rain sensor. That way it's not going off when it's raining outside. We wanted to make sure every irrigation system had a mechanism that you could turn it off and on based on the type of restrictions that would be imposed. Every other day, twice a week. That mechanism, that control mechanism, works. And then third, we wanted to make sure that there was a maintenance on these systems every year to make sure that it works properly. And we proposed this, we brought it to the advisory committee, and you know, it just was too soon. And so maybe that's something that we would revisit. You brought it up here today. I know that Duane is looking forward to that, and John has been harping on us to do it for a long, long while. It's a big step. You know, the water that people spend a lot of money for to invest, to put a well into their property, to be able to water their landscape, to put restrictions on that. Well, let's make sure you're using it efficiently. We love that part of it. But also with the bylaw, there's a component that ties it to the state restrictions as far as limiting water use for drought declarations. So that's what the bylaw had. We have it in draft. I know I turned that in, and so that's something that you would have. We could talk about that a little bit later. Again, that was just something we brought forward. It's not something we're doing now, the Water Supply Committee, but it's there and we have done it, and you know, if the community wants it, we'll do it. But I can speak to other issues as we come to them, but that's my role, just to make sure that the interests of a town are best served and that we have oversight and control of all these areas relative to our water supply, from obtaining it to getting rid of it to regulating it. So, thank you.
Thanks, Kirk.
Yep.
You mentioned South Hingham and sewering. Just kind of generally, how does that, I don't know if this is a question for Duane,
Yeah, I think so.
how would that be equate to a trade-off or a credit, I guess, in the regulatory perspective?
So I mentioned the term mitigation earlier. So if Hingham needs, let's say, 100,000 gallons more than they currently allocated to a draw, and that 100,000, part of it's to go to South Hingham for development down there, we're going to assume what you're going to do with the water once you take it. So if that additional water is going to go to South Hingham but stay through septic system, we're going to credit roughly 85% of that 100,000 is going back into the ground through septic system. 15% is generally the rule of thumb we use for it's consumptively lost through evaporation. You know, you boil water, it evaporates, you water your flowers. So keeping it in the basin reduces your mitigation volumes and significantly by 85% if you keep it in the Weir River Watershed.
And the problem we have in South Hingham, as we know, that's not part of the Weir River Watershed. And so,
well, when we talk watershed, sorry,
keep up.
We're treating the global. You're part of what we call the Boston Harbor Basin, which runs from pretty much you're the edge, the Weir River, all the way over to the Neponset. So provided you know you're staying in that watershed, you're going to get 85% credit. If you're putting it into another watershed, coastal. Yeah, you'll get half as much credit by moving it. You're helping another watershed, but you're not helping the one where it's coming from. So there's credits to be had. It's just a question of how much.
They learned something right there.
And that wouldn't necessarily, would that apply to sewering and tying into MWRA? That's leaving the watershed altogether.
Right. So if that 100,000 is now not going in, it's 100,000 lost, and that results in the mitigation being 100,000 gallons. There's no, and it's not a credit. We call it a wastewater adjustment. You bring it back, put it back in the ground, you get an adjustment for the amount you're going to mitigate.
Yeah. We met with the MWRA. They have no appetite at all to take wastewater from South Hingham. None, zero. And so we're looking at whether, keeping it in the ground in that area or maybe bringing it back into the Weir River with a decentralized plant, $32 million worth of a plant, by the way. And that's something that Skip was on the same committee, the Master Wastewater Planning Committee, and that was the recommendation that we came up with to assist with South Hingham and development there, but also assist the town with retaining the water within our watershed. So they like that number, huh?
So, Joan, if you want to say a couple words about maybe what's happening on a legislative level, or what things we can do to kind of show interest or show some of our what our issues might be, how to do that. That would be great. Thank you.
So thank you so much for including me and inviting me here tonight. It's always a pleasure to be with you, and thank you to the panelists for all of your remarks. Really incredibly articulate, really interesting, and I learned more than a few things tonight, which is really great. So I'm your state rep for Hingham, Hull, Cohasset, and it's actually interesting to be sitting here as someone from Hull. We are acutely aware of the fact that we don't contribute to the water system, but yet we're sewered, which is a good thing for Boston Harbor and for the larger, broader environmental. But I would love to have a conversation around Hull sewer and how that might contribute as gray water contributing back towards, towards the system as a whole. But it makes you start to think about how the Weir River and the larger ACEC. So first of all, I have to say I was struck by a couple of things as I was listening tonight. First of all, I kudos to Hingham for being excellent stewards of the environment, and to be thoughtful, very thoughtful, sensible planners. I can't remember who said it, but someone said, it really does all relate back to the larger planning. And, what are the planning tools that we have, and being thoughtful about things like, recognizing that with climate change and sea level rise come things like high impact storms. And it was funny, as someone who's recently campaigned across sort of the Senate district as well, and going with my Hull message of sea level rise and why this is so important, to places like Norwell, where they really do need to be equally concerned about flood mitigation, and the way that the high intensity storms, places like Hull and Cohasset and Scituate might deal with wave action and wind, but Hingham and Norwell and the inner sort of more bucolic places are dealing with how intense rainstorms, flash floods, things like that, erosion, and whether or not whether or not the water is really coming back into the system. And I think what I took away from that was it really starts with a commitment in the larger region to smart growth planning. And I think there's some really tremendous tools out there that we talk about things like grass swales and Hull, but here, it's really the impervious surfaces, and what are the strategies that we can use for planning purposes to really start to think more broadly about why we might not want to have Stop and Shop with this huge paved parking, and how we do, in fact, start to do things with more impervious surfaces. And I think that will be something that on the legislative side, that is an opportunity for the communities to work with your legislative delegation, myself and Senator O'Connor, on making sure that things like the stretch code, and that there are opportunities for planning that really do take into consideration the health of our environment and the impacts that we make, because we sort of danced around South Hingham, but that's an important development ultimately for the town of Hingham and for the larger region for economic stability and health, and so how we manage these together. So that was really great. The other thing that jumped to my mind too was I had not realized the tremendous amount, thank you for your comments in particular, around land conservancy. I hadn't realized how much the town had done by way of that, and I think, what are the opportunities for us to make sure that programs out of places like DCR and through the larger environmental agencies to actually fund land conservation, because small towns, Hingham's bigger than, say, it's some of its neighbors, but as a whole, small towns don't always have we have a lot of needs, we have a lot of infrastructure needs, we don't always have a lot of opportunity for conserving land, and so kudos to you again. That's a tremendous amount to have 100 acres in the heart of the watershed, and where there are more opportunities, and maybe we can sort of start to build some consensus and energy around grant programs for things like that. I think that's something else that the communities can call for and then try to work with the legislative delegation. But the other thing I'm just going to say, and I say it everywhere I go, we sort of talked to some of you mentioned it a little bit, but how do we change mindsets? I'm your state legislator, I'm working on Beacon Hill, and we think about what are the opportunities for broad-based laws that then become specific regulations that are implemented, but not everything has a legislative solution. And I think one of the things that I think we should really start thinking about is how do we take advantage of last year's drought and really drive home the fact that as a community we really should be thinking about how conservation. So it's turning off I always have the example of turn off the water. I don't know who said this to me, but I always remember this: turn off the water while you're brushing your teeth. And how do we take steps to just integrate that into our own personal lives? So we had the drought, and we know, and kudos to Aquarian for a tremendous program to really try to get people to take out their irrigation systems. That's a big one, that's an obvious one, but I'd also think we should challenge ourselves to maybe think about how do we conserve and just use less water in our day-to-day lives. So I am your state rep, Senator O'Connor. Patrick O'Connor is your state senator. We work closely together, and we look for a dialogue. From my perspective, it comes from groups like yours who hold forums like this, who bring in experts and really initiate dialogues. And as you as a community start to build consensus, and I use the word community much more broadly than just Hingham. It really is the larger watershed, is our community, and we should remember that, and you should engage. I would encourage you to engage partners, in the larger Boston, and actually it really should be the Boston watershed community. And we're here as your legislative delegation. We are listening. We are, looking to work with you closely, educate us on the issues. Let us know. There were 6,000 bills filed in this session. They're now just getting assigned to their various committees. Senator O'Connor and I are on very different committees, which means we can cover a lot of space, and we can influence in a lot of different and complementary ways, which is good. But if you know of a bill that we should be paying attention to, absolutely let us know. Come visit us, educate us, send us emails, put us on your email distribution list for groups like this. Make sure that you invite us to things like this if you really want us, or we can send us one of our aides if we can't get here ourselves. But really, please establish that relationship with both myself and with him. We're both new to you, and we value your input, and we value the knowledge that you can bring to us, and we're excited to work with you. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thanks for that. I didn't mean to put you on the spot. Very good. Okay. So I think we're going to move into Q&A, and I see a pile of questions, which is great. I think if you have additional questions, please write them down. We can keep the flow of questions going. I think we have we're doing pretty good on time, so Eileen's going to start the Q&A portion.
So we have a couple of questions regarding private wells. I'm going to read all three of them. This is private wells, yeah, okay. So before the program started, I started getting some questions. So some of it may be answered. So one was very clear: will it be possible to stop private wells from drawing water in Hingham? And I think, Kirk, you educated us a little bit that there are irrigation wells, and there's also wells separately permitted that people are using for their drinking
And
water.
people have the right to pull the water that exists under their property. You know, they have as much right to it as the public water supplier.
But we did hear from you, Kirk, and we heard about the interest in different regulations concerning private wells, irrigation wells in particular.
Yeah. And as Rainbow said, we also have a number of golf courses, and in addition to that, the fields over at Situate High School, they pull a lot of water out of this watershed. 3 of them are permitted from the state because the golf courses. I'll let Duane talk about this. And we don't have restrictive components to those because they're businesses. So Duane, why don't you, I gave you a soft, not a hard ball there. So why don't you go ahead and talk about that?
That's correct. Aquarium's not the only. We have 3 golf courses: Black Rock, Boston Golf, and South Shore Country Club, that have permits with us to irrigate their courses. And there are conditions when we hit the drought that they start to try to reduce what we'll call the ornamentals or the roughs. We do not tell them they can't water their tees and greens. You don't water a tee or green, particularly green, you don't have a golf course anymore. So we're not trying to put people out of business, but we are asking them to try to be more efficient. We are not taking on soccer fields and playing fields. We would encourage them to use best practices, water early in the morning or at night, but not in the middle of the day, to do those type of activities. The other group that withdraws in the watershed is Norwell. Norwell has wells in the upper part of the watershed. Norwell has a permit. We are pretty close to renewing their permit. Their permit, all the permits are 20 years. Theirs had expired, so we're close to renewing that. They're getting a lot of the water use conditions. I know they were implementing them last summer. They were in a very difficult place trying to meet demands as well. So, you know, Norwell's going to get kind of many of the conditions that you guys have been operating under, and as have they. They've been doing it as well.
So we've talked a little bit about this already, but what is being considered in terms of restrictions on private wells used for irrigation? And the question was whether Aquarian or DEP is responsible. Are they working together on this? So we've covered some of this, but could you talk a little bit more about what can be done? And Kirk, you mentioned something.
Right now, someone who has a private irrigation well has no binding restriction placed upon them by anyone when we go through a drought. And that's where we talked about the irrigation system bylaw that we talked about, putting a town law on those people. And Duane, talk about some of the other communities that how they've approached this.
So there's several on the North Shore that have taken on private well regulation. They passed, I think, a bylaw at town meeting. And what it does is requires the private well owners to be subject to the same water use restrictions that everyone on the municipal system is. There was one up there that passed it. The following year, the private well owner showed up at town meeting and they threw it out. So yes, it is a tough issue. As Kirk said, people have a lot invested in their landscaping, and they feel that they're going to lose something there. We would encourage folks to take on education. I mean, people want to water 7 days a week. You don't have to do that to keep a good landscape. I do know of legislation, and I'm not an expert on it. I think the environmental organizations, and you actually may know a little bit about it, had filed some legislation, and it's really early, so I don't know a lot about it, that under certain drought conditions that, so we had a hodgepodge of conditions last year. Some registered users didn't do anything. Some registered users did a lot of restrictions. Permittees were, depending on what permit, you had an old permit, you didn't have the condition. So we had people with no watering at all to people watering 7 days a week. and private well users watering whenever they wanted. The legislation, from what I've heard, is proposing to put everybody on an equal playing field. And I'm not sure how that would work. Again, it was just filed by, I think, Mass Rivers Alliance filed it. So, you know, people, I am lucky enough to sit on a kind of a national organization in other parts of the country who have droughts that get a lot more attention than ours. He said, don't let a good drought go to waste. You know, and that's what's happening. You know, there's a lot of movement on private wells. People would scoff at that a few years ago. Now communities are saying, hey, we're all taking it from the same place. That, you know, that issue. Putting people under drought restrictions is another issue. You know, everyone should be on the same playing field. So everybody's trying to learn and move forward. So I don't know what more to add on that one.
And-
There's an interesting report. It's short. It's like 17 pages that was just published by the Massachusetts Rivers Alliance that looks at 4 communities that did in fact pass bylaws related to private wells. And it highlights some of the challenges with getting it passed as well as enforcing it once it is passed. So if anyone's interested, it's on their website. I would also add that this is a new initiative for the Watershed Association, but we will be moving forward with it. So if you're interested in it, either talk to Patricia or I, and we'll get your email and we can put you on a list and let you know of any advances that we make.
And Kirk, specific question was, when might it be possible to reinsert the bylaw proposal into the town meeting process?
Every year, advisory committee looks at bylaw proposals for town meeting. So we can't do it this year, but we could do it as soon as next year if the town decides.
Okay. For John Walsh, you mentioned a desalinization plant in some town. It wasn't clear where. Can the Atlantic Ocean desalinization be part of our future? And is that, in terms of cost and feasibility, is that something we should start thinking about? California thinks about it.
Yeah. So we have not looked at desal in recent history, and there's a number of hurdles with desal. One of them is the cost of it. You've got to force water at high pressure through membranes, and that means you're pumping a lot of water up to high pressure, and that costs a lot of money. So at this point, given the technology, I don't know how applicable it is in the Northeast. Although, these drought conditions, of course, change the discussion. In California, every time there's a significant drought, desal comes up, and sometimes the droughts are long enough that they actually end up building some of these desal plants. But as soon as it starts raining again, they shut them down and they mothball them because they're just not cost efficient to run.
Yeah, I can add a little bit more. So there is a desal facility. Actually, there's 2 in Massachusetts. One serves the town of Swansea. The other is in Taunton, in Dighton on the Taunton River. And what they do is try to skim fresh water, but it's in the tidal zone. They're only, I believe, customer is Brockton. Brockton hasn't been really buying the water. So I was getting press clippings the other day that Brockton's considering buying the facility, which might change the whole formula, at least for the city of Brockton. But so we do have 2 desal facilities, and the one in the Taunton has been underused because of, as John said, the cost. And there's environmental consequences. It's on the main stem of the Taunton River, migrating fish. That is a particular concern in that permitting process, and the plant has never run anywhere near their full capacity. There's some protective measures that need to be addressed in that process. So it exists, but that's moving it a long way from Dighton up to Hingham. So.
So probably about 10 years ago now, the town of Hull actually did a feasibility study for desalination right off of Nantasket Beach. And it's, as John was saying, it's a highly expensive proposition, which is why it never moved beyond that original feasibility study, because it's energy intensive, and even though rates were low at that time, it would still be far more expensive than any other source of water 10 years ago. But it's a great report, it was well done, and I think it lays out sort of both the technology, which is mature and hasn't really changed much, some of the pressure points around the economics of it, some of the geology that's required, and why Nantasket Beach actually could be a good spot for it, and how that might offset, especially around the sewer treatment plant, and then the volume that actually could come out of it. So it's an interesting read. It's on the Hull's, it should still be on the Town of Hull's website. If it's not, I've got paper copies, just ask me, but I would recommend it if for whoever's interested in it. It's actually an interesting read.
One other technical question on the private wells area. Is there science that shows direct connection to surface water from bedrock wells, as some people are not using overburden wells?
Do you want to hit me?
I'm not sure with bedrock wells.
Well, there was some studies that we helped contribute to that the USGS did for us for some private wells in various locations throughout Massachusetts, and they showed a connection, at least on those the water comes down through the overburden. Where it gets into the bedrock is the debate, but it's coming eventually down through overburden. So, yeah, is that bedrock well impacting that river right there? Maybe not that directly. Not an overburden well is one drilled into the sand and gravel that John mentioned, where their wells are. Bedrock well may be drilled hundreds of feet down, and it's getting fractures that are coming down through the overburden, capturing water. So, you know, it's not nearly as direct, and you don't always know exactly where that connection is, but there's a surface water connection somewhere placed in a bedrock well.
This is a question for John Walsh. We're using 90% of our allotted 3.51 million gallons per day. How much further can residential development go in your service area based on single-family residences? And do you know the ratio between single-family residential and multifamily residential in terms of water use?
In terms of how much more development, I'm assuming?
Well, it was a two-part question. One was how much more in terms of single-family development can we sustain? And then the other is there a ratio between what a single-family residential unit uses versus multifamily in terms of water use?
So I'm not doing the math in my head, so there's about 350,000 gallons available a day available under the permit. And how much is the average home use?
65.
Well, 65 gallons per person. The average house is 2 to 3 people. Is generally what our rule of thumb is. So,
I can't do that math.
Yeah.
200 gallons a day. We always thought about
300, 400 a day per house.
So is that 1,000 homes? I'm just doing the math in my head. So, yeah. So there is room, under the permit for that, something on the order of 1,000 homes. And don't quote me on that because I'm just doing the math in my head here. And what we are actually focused on now, and this is working with the towns, in particular Hingham, because there's a lot of development that's going through the planning process right now, and some of it's been approved, is we have a list of all of those projects, their estimated water use. Right now it comes up to a little over 100,000 gallons per day for those projects that are defined. This does not include any of the big developments in South Hingham. So we can accommodate that because we have somewhere between 300 and 350,000 gallons a day available under the permit. So we can accommodate the growth that is defined right now in the community.
One of the things that was interesting this year, the drought was everywhere, right? It was the first thing you woke up to the television on the news. And so people actually, this past summer, they heeded the restrictions and they did not water their lawn. They didn't want to get turned in. They actually were concerned. Where in years past where we have a marginal drought, they haven't. And so that 90% this past year is because everyone was all in on this and concerned. But the past couple of years, we've been at 97 and 99% of our registration amount. And so as Dale, someone said, don't let a good drought go to waste. And I'm afraid that we won't have a good drought, and then we're going to see the 90% anymore. We're going to be higher to that registration amount. So this was an unusual year. People really heeded that warning.
That I speak to suppliers all over the state, and that is definitely the truth. Usually they feel they're getting hammered. Why do I have to do restrictions? And they're always fighting with people to do that. And they said this year they didn't have that. People bought into it, and they cut back in most communities. So it was kudos to people for listening. It being on the news every night gets people's attention.
And two questions for Kirk, one wearing your water supply hat. What impact would a town purchase of the water company, if that were to come to pass, have on water supply options?
I mentioned that the Water Supply Committee, we do 2 rolls by town meeting, and half of that's been taken away, the purchase part. And thank goodness, because we actually, one of the things, I've been there since 2002, so prior to Aquarian owning the company, we work by the art of persuasion. They control Aquarian. They're the public water supplier by law. They can do whatever they want within the confines of their regulation, the regulatory authority, which is the DEP. And so we, the town, we have no control. And so what we do is we try to, we work with them, and John's fabulous. And hopefully, we'll have people like John continue that way. But we haven't always had people that have worked with us that well. And so the purchase, the town would have complete control of our destiny. And that's a big deal. There are offsets to that, and tonight's not the night to go into that. This would take us a whole week to talk about this topic. But the Water Supply Committee, we work in harmony with the water supplier. We love them. We appreciate when they come in, and we are their liaison spokesperson for the town, and I hope we're doing a good job.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent.
There's my answer.
Okay, wearing one of your other hats, Kirk, we lose water from the aquifer via the sewer systems in town. You touched on that before. How much water do we lose each day is a question, and with a rising sea level, will more homes need to be on sewer systems, and what will we do about the aquifer then?
The water supply is easier because they meter that, okay? And on the sewer system, we measure the amount of water that's being used through the water supply, that metering. So we don't have meters at every house to determine how much wastewater is going into the system, and we do not have meters throughout the town to determine how much infiltration is coming into the pipes. We do know how much the MWRA is pumping. And, one of the concerns we have is the state park here, Wampatuck. We believe there's an enormous inflow issue there, but we can't measure it. One of the things we're going to do, and when you go to town meeting in a couple of weeks, you're actually going to be voting for us to investigate to see how much water is going into the system that you're all paying for that's coming from the ground. So we don't know, but it's unacceptably high. And I forget the second question.
No, that was, it was how much, and, with the rising sea level, will more homes need to be on sewer systems? And
there's a tremendous inflow issue down by the square. We don't know where that water is coming from, and we can determine whether it has salinity to it, and there's some there. It's really hard to find infiltration into a sewer pipe. It's a little easier with the water supply because you listen and you do that 3 in the morning. But with us, it's tough. And again, I've only been on the sewer commission for like a year and a half now, so I'm learning that process now. But we spent a lot of money in infiltration inflow abatement. So we're doing our best, and you're going to see that in town meeting coming up.
Adding to that, I think part of that question was getting at septic systems become less effective as groundwater tables rise, which is likely to happen with sea level rise. So I think part of that question too was, will our ability to treat waste through septic systems be compromised, therefore causing more people to go on sewers? I don't know the answer, but I think that's a fascinating issue. They've done groundwater studies to determine the level of rise in aquifers like out on the Cape. We haven't done that, I don't think, here, but that's something that people are thinking about.
And what we're doing in Hingham, like most towns, we do innovative septic systems in which it stores the water in a tank and then it douses it out to a field, which is only within a foot from the surface of the ground, surface of the soil, and so you don't have to worry about your septic field, your septic being so close to the groundwater and deep within 15 feet of where the groundwater is. We can design a system like Cohasset's all ledge, and that water is being thrown on the surface through these dousing systems, through innovative technology. We use that with almost every Title V failure in this town. We don't condemn houses here. Nobody does. We get a system that's going to work, and typically it's using this technology. So it's only the older systems that are deeper in the ground that you'd have to worry about raising an elevated water table. But I don't see that as being a principal concern for what we're using now with technology.
And where are you stored now? Probably more on the coast than you are up in the watershed. So they would feel the impact of any sea level rise much sooner than anywhere else.
And I have two questions that I'd like to direct to Lonnie Fournier, if you could come up representing the Conservation Commission. One is about restoration of neglected or abandoned town lands. One mentioned was George Washington Forest, one was Tranquility Grove, another was a 7-acre parcel of land that we discussed at the beginning of the meeting, that maybe you can talk about this kind of holistically. And then there's a second question, but I'll let you deal with this one first.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, hello, I'm Lonnie Fournier with the Conservation Commission. I think I've met, it was whistling before, I don't want to get too close. I think I've met a lot of you, so it's good to see you again. With respect to the properties that were mentioned, I know a lot or a little bit about 2 of them and not much about the 3rd. So I can comment on George Washington Forest, which I'm working with DPW and the Forest and Park Division, or the Tree and Park Division, to manage the red pine scale that's in effect over there. A lot of the red pine trees that were planted many years ago as part of a conservation effort are dying. And so those are threatening to both habitat and visitors, and we're trying to manage that issue first. Once those trees come out, we found that Mother Nature does a really good job of regenerating the forest with species that do well in that area. So we're not really focusing on replanting right now. We're just trying to get a handle on the red pine scale and taking out the trees that are hazardous.
Tranquility Grove?
Sure. So Tranquility Grove is a new one to me. But I do know that the Historic Commission or Historic Districts Commission is working on identifying that site, so relocating it, and then sort of revitalizing it. So doing some clearing that would be necessary, possibly making some trail connections.
This is Burns Memorial Park,
yes.
I think is the way people refer to it.
Yes, correct. Thank you very much. So I haven't seen it myself, but I do know that it's been a topic of recent Historic Commission meetings. You might be able to dial in on HCAM and see what they've been talking about there. And certainly Andrea Young at the town hall, she knows a lot about it as well. She's been keeping me up to date because from the conservation perspective, if we do want to connect to it with a trail in Burns Memorial, we want to do any clearing, if there are wetlands nearby, she's just keeping me in the loop on that project. So she knows a lot more than me, but I can tell you it's certainly high on the radar from the historic perspective. The 3rd piece is the island, and I think it's actually Broad Cove and not Bear Cove. I don't know a lot about that. I think for general priority level, we tend to pay attention to the properties that are used the most. I don't know how often the island is used, but I can certainly look into that. And that, I think, goes back to a bigger question as well, or a bigger point as well, is that it's really hard for me and even my teammates in town hall to be everywhere all at once. So if you have concerns about specific properties, I'm certainly new here. I haven't visited everything that we own, but I always welcome a phone call or an email to say, hey, this is my favorite spot and this is what I see happening, or I used to go here all the time and now I can't access it. So we're interested in hearing about issues that are out there because we can't be there all at once. So don't hesitate to contact us either.
Okay. And one other question, I think I'll direct to Lonnie. Will the proposed rebuilding of the bridge on Rockland Street over the Weir River open up the flow enough to restore some of the riverbank and leave enough vertical space for kayaks and sea level rise?
So that's a good question. I have only heard rumors of that project being looked at by the state. Certainly there are others in the room, maybe those affiliated with the Weir River Association, that would know more about it than I do, but I've only heard that it's being looked at the state level, and then it may not be the highest priority for them. So I don't know how close we are to having that project being done. I'll open it up, Kristen, or maybe Patty, if you know anything about it. No? Okay. So that's all I know, is I've only heard sort of upper level talk. I haven't heard anything actually in respect to rubber meeting the road and repairs being done anytime soon.
So I can inquire about that.
Awesome. Thank you.
And thank you, Lonnie, for being here and for jumping up, even though Lonnie has been in town only a short time, and I've been on the Land Conservation Trust only a short time, I can vouch for how responsive she is. So please do send her a note if you notice a piece of property that you think is neglected, and she can probably respond in some fashion. I'm going to turn it back to Skip now, because I think he has some final things before we go, but thank you for all your wide-ranging questions.
Well, thank you all for being here. Just wanted to wrap up with a big thank you to our panelists for taking the time to help us better understand the watershed. Thanks to Joan for being here. We appreciate it, and Lonnie. And I want to give a special thanks to Eileen, who really did most of the legwork on putting this all together. So thank you, Eileen, for that. Thanks to our panelists. And before we go, I wanted to announce our spring walk has been scheduled for April 15th at Wheelwright Park in Cohasset. And so there's a flyer, I believe, on the table on your way out. We'll be sending an email and posting on our Facebook page and all that good stuff. So, but mark your calendars now. And I believe Steve Ivis will be our guide. So that's always a big draw. So get there early. With that, I want to thank you all again for being here. Have a good night. And again, thank you so much to our panelists for being here. Appreciate it.
Yep.